Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I hadn't seen her in over a year, not since that night. The memory of our last argument was still fresh, every word etched into my mind like a scar. And now she was here, standing on my doorstep, holding a baby bundled in a blue blanket. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale and drawn, as if she'd been wandering through a storm. I stared at the baby, then back at her, my heart pounding so hard it felt like my chest would explode. "This is your son," she said, voice trembling, but with a hint of defiance, like she expected me to argue. I blinked, trying to process her words. "What?" "Your son, John. His name's Lucas." She shifted the baby in her arms, and for a split second I thought I saw something almost tender cross her face. But then it was gone, replaced by that same unreadable expression she always wore when she was hiding something. "Why are you here, Mia?" My voice came out colder than I intended. It was the only way I could keep the rising tide of anger from spilling over. "Where the hell have you been?" She didn't answer. Instead, she set the baby carrier down on the floor and turned away, as if she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. My gaze dropped to the baby, his tiny fist poking out of the blanket. He looked so innocent, so completely unaware of the chaos he'd just been dropped into. I felt a sudden, irrational surge of protectiveness. But then I remembered. This was Mia, the woman who disappeared without a word, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of our marriage. And now she was back, with a baby. My baby? "Mia, wait!" I reached out, but she was already halfway down the porch steps, her movements quick and mechanical, like she couldn't get away fast enough. "You can't just leave it here." She paused, her back to me, shoulders stiff. "I have to go, John. I can't do this anymore." Her voice cracked, a slight tremor betraying the calm facade. "Just take care of him, please." Before I could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the darkness like some kind of ghost. I stood there, stunned, staring after her, the baby's soft whimpers pulling me back to reality. What the hell just happened? The house felt suffocatingly quiet after she left. I paced the living room, my mind racing, trying to make sense of the situation. The baby, Lucas, she had said, was sleeping in the carrier. Every now and then he made a small sound, a soft coo or a sway, and I felt my chest tighten with a strange mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to name. There was no way he was mine. I knew it in my gut, but the thought lingered, gnawing at me. What if Mia had lied before, but never like this, never something so outrageous, so final? My phone buzzed, startling me out of my thoughts. A text from Mark, my best friend since college. "Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keys. What could I even weigh that my wife, no, ex-wife practically, had just shown up after a year's absence, dumped a baby on my doorstep, and vanished again? Instead, I typed back, "Busy night, I'll call you tomorrow." I set the phone down and looked back at Lucas. He was still asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Something tightened in my throat. How long had Maya been carrying out this deception? Was this the reason she'd left? To have someone else's child and then, what, pin it on me? The memory of our last fight surged back, vivid and raw. We'd argued about money, about trust, about the fact that I'd caught her lying again. But I never thought it would come to this. I'd never considered that she was capable of something like this. I moved closer to the baby, feeling a strange urge to, what, pick him up? Hold him? He looked so helpless, so undeserving of whatever twisted game Mia was playing. No, I wouldn't let myself get drawn into her chaos again. I needed answers, not emotions. Clarity, not confusion. The paternity test was my first move. The idea of having to wait days for the results gnawed at me, but I knew it was the only way to get the truth. I collected the sample, feeling like some kind of intruder as I swabbed the baby's cheek. He stared up at me with wide, unblinking eyes, and for a moment I felt a stab of guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a grim determination. I couldn't afford to let emotions cloud my judgment. Not now. Every second that passed after Mia's sudden appearance felt like an eternity. My thoughts spiraled through a maze of doubts and anger, every possible scenario playing out in vivid detail. What if the test came back positive? What if it didn't? Either way, Mia had to have known what she was doing, dropping this bombshell on me and then disappearing again. I called her number at least a dozen times, each call going straight to voicemail. No surprise there. Mia was always good at disappearing when she wanted to. The baby, Lucas, stirred in his sleep, and I glanced over, wondering what he made of all this, as if he understood. But he was just a baby, oblivious to the turmoil swirling around him. I felt a flicker of something, pity, maybe. Not for Mia, but for him. If she'd lied about his father, then he was just as much a victim in this as I was. Maybe more. The house seemed to shrink around me as the hours passed. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mia's face, her expression distant and haunted. I replayed her words over and over in my head, searching for some clue, some sign I'd missed. What was she really after? I thought about calling Mark again, or maybe my sister, but something stopped me. What would I say? How could I even begin to explain this mess? I could already imagine the disbelief in their voices, the questions I didn't have answers to. No, this was something I needed to handle on my own, at least until I knew what I was dealing with. But doubt gnawed at me. What if the baby was mine? What if everything Mia said was true? No, I couldn't let myself go down that path. She'd always had a way of twisting reality, of making me second-guess myself until I didn't know what was real anymore. I wouldn't let her do that to me again. I forced myself to sit down at the kitchen table, the silence pressing in on me like a physical weight. I opened my laptop, pulled up the email from the lab, and reread the instructions for the paternity test, making sure I hadn't missed anything. Everything was in order. All I could do now was wait and try not to lose my mind in the process. It took 3 agonizing days for the results to come back. 3 days of staring at my phone, checking my email obsessively, jumping every time I heard a notification. 3 days of sleepless nights, pacing through the house like a caged animal. And then finally the email arrived. My heart raced as I clicked it open, my eyes scanning the screen for the only words that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0%. A wave of relief and fury crashed over me at the same time. I knew it. I knew she was lying, but that didn't lessen the impact. She tried to pin another man's child on me. And why? To hurt me? To trap me? I felt my hands shaking as I closed the laptop. I should have been relieved, but all I felt was rage. Mia had played me for a fool, but not anymore. Now it was my turn to make her pay. I stared at the test results again, even though the words hadn't changed. Probability of paternity, 0. That simple sentence had flipped my world on its head, confirming what I already suspected and yet still hoped wasn't true. My relief was short-lived, overtaken almost immediately by a crushing fury. I felt like an idiot for having even entertained the idea that Mia could be telling the truth. She'd lied again, but this wasn't some petty deception. She tried to tie me to a child that wasn't mine, upend my life in a way that would have made it impossible to move on. I needed to talk to someone, vent my anger, but who? I couldn't call my family. They'd never liked Mia, had warned me repeatedly she was trouble. Admitting now that she'd conned me would just make me look like a fool. And Mark? No, he'd only tell me to let it go. They all would. But letting go wasn't an option. I couldn't just walk away, pretend like this never happened, like she hadn't tried to destroy me. Instead, I found myself turning inward, replaying every conversation, every moment of our relationship, sifting through the rubble of our past for clues I must have missed. I'd been so blind, so pathetically willing to believe her lies. I couldn't see it for what it was back then, a series of carefully crafted manipulations designed to keep me guessing, always doubting myself instead of her. I scrolled through our old messages, forcing myself to relive the arguments, the apologies, the desperate explanations that never quite lined up. There were gaps, periods of time when she'd drop off the radar, her explanations vague or contradictory. Just visiting a friend, she'd said more than once, or my phone died. The stories were endless, each one more plausible than the last, and I'd swallowed them all. But not this time. She wouldn't get away with it. The first person I contacted was Mia's sister, Emily. If anyone knew where she'd been for the past year, it would be Emily. The two of them were close, too close sometimes. It had always felt like Mia and Emily shared secrets I wasn't privy to. Their bond unbreakable, even when Mia's behavior strained the rest of her relationships to the breaking point. When I called, Emily picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp and suspicious. "What do you want, John?" "I need to talk to Mia," I said flatly, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. A pause, then a bitter laugh. "Good luck with that. Haven't seen her in months." "She hasn't called, hasn't texted. Typical Mia, right?" My jaw clenched. I could hear the resentment in Emily's voice, the undercurrent of anger she tried to hide. "She dropped a baby off at my place, said it was mine. Turns out it's not." "What?" Emily's voice turned cold, all humor gone. She left a baby with you? That's insane, even for her." "I want to know where she's been, Emily. I want to know everything." She sighed, and I imagined her rubbing her temples in that exasperated way she always did. "I'm serious, John. I haven't seen her. Last time we talked, it was a fight." She was asking for money, again. I told her no and hung up. That was it. When was this? 6 months ago, maybe 7. She was on some kind of trip. Didn't say where, just that she'd be gone for a while. "Did she mention the baby?" I pressed, my voice tight with frustration. "No." "Christ, John, I didn't even know she was pregnant." Emily's voice cracked, and for a moment I thought she might break down. But she caught herself, and when she spoke again, her tone was resolute. "I'll try to find her. I'll ask around, see if anyone's heard from her." "Don't bother," I muttered, already deciding Emily wouldn't be any help. If Mia was hiding from her own sister, she'd be careful enough not to leave any obvious traces. "I'll handle it." "John," Emily started, but I hung up, my mind already racing ahead to the next step. I knew what I had to do. Mia was careful, but everyone left a trail somewhere. It was just a matter of finding it. I started with her bank accounts, leveraging my access to what little information I still had. A few calls and some social engineering later, I managed to get into an old shared account we'd opened years ago. Most of the money had been drained, but the transaction history told a story Mia probably thought no one would ever read. There were payments to obscure names, small amounts funneled out every few days. A few larger withdrawals here and there, each one marked with vague descriptors like personal expenses or travel costs. But the real find was a series of deposits, irregular amounts coming from different sources, always routed through the same intermediary bank. Mia had been getting money from somewhere, and given how often she changed the source, it wasn't hard to figure out that these weren't your typical paychecks. I spent hours cross-referencing the deposits, tracing them back as far as I could. The more I dug, the more I uncovered a pattern. There were other men she'd probably told the same story she'd told me, or variations of it. "I need help, just a little money. I'll pay you back." Each deposit had a name attached to it, and it didn't take much to track a few of them down. One name in particular stood out: David Palmer. He'd made several large payments to Mia over the course of a year, each one labeled as support or loan repayment. I found his number through a quick search and called him before I could second-guess myself. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was wary, uncertain. "David Palmer?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as I could manage. "Yes, who's this?" "My name's John. I was Mia's husband." I paused, letting that sink in. "I think you and I need to talk." Meeting David in person felt surreal. He was nothing like I'd imagined, just an average guy in his mid-30s with tired eyes and a wary demeanor. We sat across from each other in a dingy diner. the kind of place no one would pay attention to two men having an intense conversation over coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "I thought she loved me," he said, voice hollow. She said, Spite, she said she needed help, that she was in trouble. I gave her everything I had, and then she just vanished." I nodded, feeling a sick sort of kinship with him. "She does that. Leaves you with nothing but questions." David ran a hand through his hair, staring down at the table. I I know she wasn't perfect, but I thought she was genuine. What kind of person does something like this?" "A con artist," I said bluntly. "A manipulator." His face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might cry, but he held it together, anger sparking in his eyes. "What do? We find her, and we make sure she can't do this to anyone else." The plan started to form then, vague and unrefined, but it was there. David wasn't the only one. I found others, men who'd been lied to, manipulated, each one with his own version of Mia's twisted game, each one of them broken in a way that mirrored my own pain, and each one willing, almost desperate, to do something about it. I spent weeks unraveling the web Mia had spun. Every thread led to another lie, another victim, each story more infuriating than the last. She'd taken money, time, emotions, everything she could get her hands on, and then moved on without a trace. But now, piece by piece, I was stitching that web back together, drawing closer to her with every new revelation. By the time I finished, I had a list of names and contacts, a small army of people Mia had wronged, all of them ready to see her pay. I'd given everything I found to the authorities, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Mia had slipped through the cracks before, and she'd do it again unless I made sure she couldn't. I was sitting alone one night, staring at the baby monitor, when the thought hit me. Mia didn't just want to hurt me. She wanted to control me, to trap me. Lucas had been her trump card, a way to keep me tied to her, even if I hated her for it. I realized then that my revenge couldn't be simple. It couldn't just be about exposing her lies. I needed to strip away that control, that power she thought she had over me. It wasn't enough to watch her fall. I had to make sure she couldn't rise again. So I made a decision, one that would change everything. I picked up the phone and dialed. "I want to report a case of fraud and child abandonment. Sanyak Fana," I said, my voice steady and clear. I laid out everything I'd found, every sordid detail of Mia's schemes. The person on the other end listened, took notes, and promised to follow up. But I knew they wouldn't find her, not unless I led them right to her. Hanging up, I felt an odd sense of calm. I'd set the wheels in motion, but this was just the beginning. If Mia thought she could disappear into the shadows, I'd drag her back into the light. She wasn't getting away this time. I spent countless nights piecing together every single detail of Mia's life that I could dig up. She'd perfected her deception over the years, leaving just enough clues for me to follow but never quite catching up to her. The sense of betrayal ran deep, but more than that, it was the insult. She thought she could outsmart me, thought I'd roll over and accept the mess she'd made of my life. But this time I wasn't going to be her victim. Instead of wallowing, I used my sleepless nights productively, filling notebook after notebook with timelines, bank statements, social media profiles of her other victims, every tiny thread I could pull. The list of people she'd conned grew longer by the day, and each new name was a slap to my face, a reminder of how deeply she'd been playing this game. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Mia wasn't just lying to hurt me, it was a pattern, a sickness almost. And she'd left destruction in her wake everywhere she went. The names on my list became an obsession. I traced her history with each of them, uncovering familiar patterns. Quick relationships, sudden need for financial help, promises of love and companionship that turned to manipulation and heartbreak. She'd always leave before the mess caught up to her, disappearing without a trace until she popped back into my life with that baby, trying to pull the same stunt on me. I couldn't let it end here. Exposing Mia to the police was supposed to be the first step, but it didn't feel like enough. I realized that while the authorities could press charges, assuming they even found her, they wouldn't truly make her pay. Not in the way I needed her to. Mia was too slippery, too good at evading justice. I knew she'd find a way to escape, just as she always had. So I shifted my focus. I didn't just want her arrested. I wanted to ruin her, strip away any support system she had left, destroy her reputation, and turn every single person she'd ever manipulated against her. It had to be personal. I had to make her feel the isolation, the desperation she'd forced on all of us. I started with her family. Calling Emily had been a test, and she'd failed spectacularly. Whether out of genuine ignorance or misplaced loyalty, she wouldn't help me, so I cut her out of my plan. Mia's parents had been estranged from her for years, so they were a dead end too. That left me with her closest circle of friends, people I knew she'd relied on in the past. I made it my mission to find them, one by one, and unravel the web she'd spun. Most of her friends were hesitant to talk to me, understandably wary of getting dragged into whatever drama Mia had concocted. But I wore them down, convincing them piece by piece that they didn't know the real Mia. With each conversation, I laid out the evidence, the facts, the bank records, the photos of her with other men, the testimonies of her victims. Slowly, the disbelief turned to anger and then to resolve. The truth started to spread, rippling through her network like a poison. But just as I was ready to make my next move, start contacting the other victims directly, something unexpected fell into my lap. I was going through another round of phone calls late one evening when I received an email from a man named Greg Walters. He claimed he'd been involved with Mia not too long ago and wanted to meet. His tone was cryptic, and he didn't give much away, but there was something about his message that felt different. It wasn't desperation or heartbreak. It was something darker. I couldn't tell if he was a friend or a threat, but I had to find out. I agreed to meet him at a secluded cafe on the edge of town. When I arrived, I spotted him immediately. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a heavy coat that seemed out of place given the mild weather. His eyes were sharp, assessing, as if he was deciding whether I was worth his time. "You, John?" he asked as I approached. His voice was low, steady. "That's me." I took a seat across from him, my guard up. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. "You've been looking into Mia, digging pretty deep from what I hear." "I have," I said, keeping my voice calm. "And who are you exactly?" "Let's just say I've got a personal interest in her too. But you and I," he leaned forward, lowering his voice, "we're not the same. I don't want to bring her to justice. I want to make sure she pays." The intensity in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. I'd expected anger, but this was something else. This was a man who was capable of far worse than I was. My mind raced, trying to figure out what angle he was playing. "What did she do to you?" I asked carefully. He smirked, but there was no humor in it. "She took more than money. Promised me the world, and then tried to sell me out to people who don't take kindly to betrayal." He tapped his fingers on the table, his gaze flickering with something dangerous. "Let's just say she's got a few enemies who aren't as patient as you or me." The implication hung heavy in the air between us. Whoever this guy was, Mia had crossed a line with him that went beyond the game she'd played with the rest of us. This was serious. "I don't want her dead," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "I just want her ruined." Greg tilted his head, studying me like he was trying to decide if I was lying. "Yeah, I figured. You've got that righteous vibe. But here's the thing, John. Mia's not just going to let you destroy her life. She's too good at getting away, too good at slipping out of tight spots. You really want to bring her down? You're gonna have to lure her back. And I think I know how." My heart pounded as he outlined his plan. It was brilliant in its simplicity and brutal in its execution. He suggested that I play on Mia's arrogance, make her think I was desperate to see her again, willing to beg her to come back, draw her in with promises of forgiveness and the chance to start fresh. It was risky, but it was exactly the kind of bait she'd go for. Mia thrived on control, on thinking she could twist people around her finger. If I dangled the right opportunity, she'd take it. "And what do you get out of this?" I asked once he'd finished. "I get to be there when she realizes she's lost, when everything she's worked for crumbles around her." You get your revenge, and I get my satisfaction. He leaned back, crossing his arms. So, what do you say? I hesitated. Everything about this felt dangerous, unpredictable, but I couldn't deny the appeal. Greg's plan was exactly what I needed to corner Mia, to make her pay for everything she'd done. And if it got out of hand, well, I'd just have to be ready to pull the plug before things went too far. Fine, I said, holding his gaze. I'm in. I spent the next week executing the first phase of the plan. I reached out to Mia through a disposable email, pretending to be the broken, desperate man she probably expected me to be. The tone was carefully crafted, apologetic, regretful, full of pleas for her to come back, to let us fix things for the sake of the baby she'd abandoned. It took everything I had to write those words, to pretend like I wanted anything to do with her, but I forced myself through it, knowing it was a necessary part of the trap. It didn't take long for her to respond. She was wary, of course, suspicious of my sudden change of heart, but the promise of reconciliation was too tempting for her to ignore. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she weighed the risks against the potential rewards. She'd always loved the thrill of getting one over on people, and this was no different. If she thought I was weak, she'd come. A few more carefully worded messages later, and she agreed to meet. I arranged for a quiet location, somewhere neutral, where she'd feel safe, but where I could control the situation. Greg would be close by, watching, ready to step in if things went south. As I finalized the details, a strange calm settled over me. This was it, the culmination of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed. Mia thought she'd be walking into a victory, another chance to manipulate me and keep me under her thumb. But she was wrong. This time, she'd see exactly what happened when you push someone too far. When the day finally came, I stood outside the cafe we'd agreed on, hands clenched at my sides, pulse hammering in my ears. I scanned the street, my eyes narrowing as I caught sight of a familiar figure in the distance. Mia. She was smiling. That same self-assured, smug smile I'd seen too many times before. My chest tightened with rage, but I forced myself to breathe, to keep my face neutral. Hey, John, she said, her voice sweet and dripping with false concern. I knew you'd come around. Yeah, I murmured, meeting her gaze steadily. I came around all right. And just like that, the trap was set. The moment Mia sat down across from me, I could see her sizing me up, her eyes flitting over my face, my hands, as if searching for any sign of weakness. I'd played my part well, letting her think I was desperate, shattered, and willing to forgive. But every muscle in my body was tense, coiled tight as I fought to keep my expression placid. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to destroy her. She leaned back, that confident smile widening. So, John, you're finally ready to talk like an adult? Yeah, I guess I am. I let out a long, shaky breath, looking down at my hands, doing my best impression of a broken man. I just want to understand, Mia, you vanished, came back out of nowhere and left me with a baby that's not even mine. What the hell was all that about? Her smile faltered slightly and she tilted her head as if considering how much to reveal. I told you I wasn't in a good place. I panicked. I thought I needed you, that we could start fresh. She reached out, placing a hand on mine. The touch made my skin crawl. But when I saw you again, I realized I wasn't ready. I swallowed, pretending to consider her words, then looked up, meeting her gaze with all the sincerity I could muster. I still care about you, Mia, even after everything. I forced a pained smile. Maybe we can figure things out. There. I saw it, the flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought she had me. I could practically hear the gears turning in her mind as she calculated the next move. If she was playing this card, she was more desperate than I'd realized, and that was exactly what I needed. Do you really mean that, John? She murmured, leaning forward. Because I've missed you, missed us. I know I screwed up, but I think maybe we could fix it, start over. I nodded slowly, letting my gaze drift past her to the entrance of the cafe. Greg was out there somewhere, watching, waiting for my signal. He'd warned me not to get too close, not to let her bait me into anything that might complicate our plan. But he didn't understand the hold Mia used to have on me, the way she could twist reality until I didn't know which way was up. "You're right," I said softly, keeping my voice just loud enough for her to hear. "I think we should give it another shot." I shifted in my seat, forcing the words out. "But if we're going to make this work, you need to come back to the city. I need to know you're serious." She hesitated, suspicion flickering across her face. I held my breath, waiting for her to take the bait. "Back to the city?" she repeated slowly. "Why there? Why not somewhere new? A clean slate, just the two of us?" "No, Mia. No more running." I let a hint of steel slip into my voice, just enough to let her know I wasn't going to bend this time. "If you want me back, you come to me. Otherwise, this is over." She narrowed her eyes, a smile tightening, but after a long, tense silence, she nodded. "Okay, John. I'll come back." She leaned back, her gaze calculating. "Just give me the little time to get things in order." My pulse quickened. I'd won this round. Mia was on the hook, and now it was just a matter of reeling her in. I stood abruptly, startling her, and tossed some money on the table. "Let me know when you're ready," I said, turning away before she could see the relief on my face. "I'll be waiting." It took a week for Mia to make her move. I'd gone back to the city, maintaining just enough contact to keep her convinced that I was wavering, that I'd cave if she pushed the right buttons. All the while, Greg and I set up the next stage of the plan. It was time to drag Mia out of the shadows and into the light. I reached out to her former victims, those I could find who still had enough fight left in them to take action. Some were hesitant, too hurt or ashamed to face her again, but a few responded with a determination that mirrored my own. One by one, I fed them information: where Mia had been, who she'd targeted, how she'd twisted their lives apart. I gave them just enough to stoke the embers of their anger, to make them realize they weren't alone. Then I gave them her location. It was a delicate balance, keeping Mia oblivious while I fanned the flames around her. I knew she'd get wind of it eventually, but I needed her to feel cornered, desperate enough to run back to me, thinking I was her only way out. And she did. Late one evening, just as I was starting to doubt whether she'd show, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, my heart skipping a beat when I saw her name. "Mia, I'm in town. Can we meet?" I smiled grimly, typing back a quick reply. I told her to come to my apartment, making sure to sound tentative, unsure, like I hadn't already orchestrated every detail of what was about to happen. Greg was already waiting when she arrived. He'd insisted on being there, watching from a safe distance as Mia walked into our trap. I didn't argue. He was right. She was too slippery to trust with anything less than complete surveillance. I buzzed her in, my heart pounding as I heard the faint click of the front door. Moments later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it slowly, schooling my expression into something neutral, maybe a little hopeful. Mia stepped inside, her gaze darting around as if expecting someone to jump out at her. She looked nervous, and for the first time, I realized just how vulnerable she really was. She'd burned so many bridges that she had nowhere left to turn. "John," she breathed, her voice a little shaky. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "I told you I want to make this work. But you need to be honest with me, Mia." "No more games?" She nodded quickly, her eyes wide and earnest. "I swear, no more lies. I just want a chance to fix things." "Good." I gestured toward the couch. "Sit down, let's talk." She hesitated, then moved to the couch, perching on the edge like she was ready to bolt. I sat across from her, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "Mia, I know everything," I said quietly. "The other men, the money, the leads. I've talked to them. They know what you did." Her face drained of color, but she didn't speak, just stared at me with those wide, panicked eyes. "But I'm willing to help you if you're willing to make things right," I continued, choosing my words carefully. "You can't keep running. You need to face what you have done." "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I mean," I paused, letting the silence stretch out, watching the fear deepen in her gaze. "You need to turn yourself in." She recoiled, shaking her head furiously. No, John, no, I can't. You don't have a choice, Mia, I said, my tone hardening. People are looking for you. People who aren't going to be as understanding as I am. I leaned forward, holding her gaze. They want you to suffer. I just want you to come clean. She was breathing fast, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. No, she whimpered. I can't go to the police. I'm not talking about the police, I interrupted sharply. I'm talking about all the people you've hurt. You need to face them, apologize, make amends. It's the only way you're going to get out of this. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I'd waited too long for this moment. I needed her to break. John, please, she pleaded. You can't do this to me. Suddenly her phone buzzed. She glanced down, and I saw her face twist in confusion. She unlocked the screen, her eyes widening as she read something. Then she looked up at me, a strange mixture of fear and anger in her expression. Who did you tell? She hissed. My stomach tightened. What are you talking about? She thrust the phone at me, her hand trembling. These messages, they're all coming for me. Why? I took the phone, scanning the messages rapidly. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the victims. Someone else had found her. Someone with a much darker intent. Greg. I stood abruptly, my mind racing. He must have gone behind my back, contacted people I hadn't even considered. This wasn't part of the plan. He'd set something in motion that I couldn't control. Mia, listen to me. No, she screamed, stumbling back, her eyes wild. You did this. You're trying to... Calm down, I snapped, stepping forward, but she shook her head violently. I'm leaving, she gasped, turning toward the door. I'm not... But before she could reach it, the door swung open and Greg stepped inside, his expression dark and dangerous. Leaving so soon, Mia, he murmured, blocking her path. Panic surged through me. This wasn't supposed to happen. I hadn't wanted this to get violent. I just wanted... You should have listened to John, Greg continued softly, his gaze never leaving Mia's. Now it's too late. And just like that, the control I'd fought so hard to maintain slipped through my fingers. Mia's eyes darted between me and Greg, confusion morphing into panic. I could see the calculations flashing across her face. She was figuring out how to get out, how to manipulate the situation in her favor. But there was no angle left to play, no lie she could spin that would change what was about to happen. Get out of my way, she said, voice sharp but tinged with fear. She edged backward, putting the couch between her and Greg. He didn't move, just watched her with a detached, almost amused expression. Relax, Mia, I'm not here to hurt you. John's got everything under control, right? I flinched, feeling a surge of anger at his casual tone. This wasn't part of the plan. I'd meant for Mia to be confronted by her victims, not ambushed like an animal. This was supposed to be about exposing her, making her face what she'd done, not... I told you I don't want it to go this way, Greg, I said tightly, taking a step forward, putting myself between them. Just, let's talk this out. Talk it out, Greg chuckled darkly. John, you're kidding yourself. She's never going to talk it out. She'll twist whatever you say, make you the bad guy. Isn't that what she's always done? Mia's gaze shifted to me, the slightest hint of desperation in her eyes. John, you don't have to do this. I know I've made mistakes, huge mistakes, but I swear I'm not who you think I am. Her voice cracked, a tear sliding down her cheek. Please, just let me explain. A wave of emotion crashed over me, anger and sadness tangling together until I couldn't tell which was stronger. All the memories I'd unearthed over the past months, the betrayal, the lies, screamed for retribution. But this felt like I was standing on the edge of something darker, something I couldn't come back from. Explain, Greg's voice sliced through the tension. You think anyone wants to hear your excuses? He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. You should be begging Mia. Begging John for mercy, for him to call off the people who are out there looking for you right now. Her face paled and she shot a look at me, pleading silently. What is he talking about, John? What did you do? Nothing, I muttered. feeling a knot tighten in my chest. I didn't tell him to— Oh, come on, Greg interrupted, shaking his head. Don't get soft on me now, John. You wanted her to pay. You were the one who said she deserved everything coming to her. Mia's gaze hardened, a flicker of defiance sparking in her eyes. So that's it then? You've turned into some kind of monster just to get back at me? I'm not— I stopped, the words sticking in my throat. Wasn't I, though? I'd crossed so many lines, justified every single one with the need to see her suffer like I had. And now, here I was, standing beside a man who clearly had no limits, who would drag her down to hell and smile while he did it. Maybe we should all calm down, I said, my voice unsteady. Mia, I just want you to— To what? She spat, eyes flashing. Admit that I'm a terrible person? That I hurt people? Her voice rose, trembling with anger and fear. Fine, you want to hear it? I'm a liar, a manipulator. I used you, John, just like I used all the others. But you don't get to stand there and act like you're some kind of hero. You brought him here, she pointed a shaking finger at Greg. And now you're going to pretend like you didn't mean for this to happen? Shut up, Greg growled, his patience evaporating. He stepped around me, grabbing her by the arm. I'm done listening to you talk. You're going to deal with this, whether you want to or not. Greg, I snapped, grabbing his shoulder and yanking him back. Let go of her. He turned, surprise flashing across his face. What the hell are you doing? I said, let go, I repeated, feeling the anger burn through my veins. This wasn't the plan. I didn't want— You didn't want? Greg sneered, his voice mocking. Then what did you want, John? To watch her get away again? To let her ruin more lives? I didn't answer, my gaze locked on Mia's tear-streaked. She was trembling, but there was something else there too, a spark of hope, of understanding. I could see her putting the pieces together, realizing I wasn't as in control as I'd pretended to be. John, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm sorry for everything I did. I really am. But this isn't justice. This is just cruelty. Shut up, Greg snapped again. But there was something uncertain in his voice now, as if he could sense the shift happening between us. Don't listen to her, John. You know what she is. I know, I said quietly, my gaze never leaving Mia's. But this— I gestured at the scene unfolding around us, the chaos I'd set in motion but couldn't stop. This isn't what I wanted. I didn't want to become this. Mia's expression softened, a tentative, fragile hope lighting her eyes. You're not, John. You're better than this. We can figure this out together. Shut up, Greg roared, yanking his arm free and shoving me back. You're really going to let her manipulate you again? After everything she's done? He glared at me, breathing hard, his face twisted with fury. I thought you had the guts to finish this, but you're just as weak as the rest of them. The words stung, cutting through my resolve. He was right in a way. Mia had twisted me up, made me doubt myself, my own morality. I'd been so certain that she deserved to be destroyed that it didn't matter how far I had to go to make her pay. But seeing her now, so broken and desperate, I realized I didn't want to become the kind of man who'd take that final step. Get out, I said softly, stepping between him and Mia again. This is over. Greg stared at me, disbelief etched across his face. You're letting her go? I'm not letting her go, I murmured, my voice steady. I'm just not letting you do whatever the hell you want. He laughed, the sound harsh and grating. Fine. You want to play the good guy now? Pretend you're above all this? Go ahead. But she's going to get what's coming to her one way or another. Before I could react, he stormed out, the door slamming shut behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with all the words left unsaid. Mia stood frozen, staring at me with a mixture of relief and disbelief. You didn't have to do that, she whispered, voice raw. You could have let him kill you? I finished bitterly. No, I'm not a killer, Mia. I just wanted revenge, she said softly. You wanted to make me suffer. Yeah, I admitted, the weight of it crushing down on me. but not like this. I never wanted to lose myself in it. Mia took a tentative step forward, her gaze searching mine. What happens now? I let out a long, shuddering breath, running a hand through my hair. I don't know. You have to go, Mia. Leave. Disappear. She flinched, but then nodded slowly. And you? Are you going to be okay? I don't know, I repeated, my voice hollow, but I'll figure it out. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the past and present crashing down around us. And then, without another word, she turned and walked out the door. The moment she was gone, I sank onto the couch, my entire body shaking. I'd won. She was gone, out of my life for good. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I'd given away a part of myself, a part I'd never get back. I picked up my phone, staring at the screen. I should call the police, report everything that had happened, but I didn't. Instead, I deleted all the messages, wiped the evidence of the past months away. It was over. But I wasn't free. Greg's words echoed in my head, each one a reminder of the darkness I'd flirted with, the edge I'd come so dangerously close to falling over. Mia was gone, but the part of me that had wanted her destroyed, wanted to see her broken and ruined, was still there. I'd saved her life, but I'd lost something of myself in the process. And now I had to figure out who I was supposed to be. Alone. The days after Mia's departure blurred together in a fog of uncertainty. The anger and drive that had fueled me that for so long were gone, leaving a hollow ache in their place. For the first time in months, there was no goal, no mission consuming my every thought. Just silence and the question that haunted me relentlessly. What now? I drifted through those first weeks, too numb to make sense of the mess I'd created. Greg's words echoed in my mind like a curse. He'd been right about one thing. I'd let myself get pulled in too deep, letting Mia's manipulations warp my reality until I couldn't see the line between justice and revenge. But now, standing on the other side of it all, I felt no satisfaction, no closure. Just the bitter realization that I'd compromised everything I believed in. I began avoiding the phone, deleting unread messages and unanswered calls from unknown numbers. Some were probably from Greg, others from Mia's victims. But I wasn't ready to face them, not after how it had all ended. I'd set off a chain reaction I couldn't control, and now I had to live with the fallout. And maybe Greg was right again. Maybe Mia would never stop. Maybe she'd continue to find new people to deceive, new lives to ruin. But it wouldn't be my responsibility anymore. I'd learned one hard truth through it all. I couldn't save anyone. Not really. One morning I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the man looking back at me. I'd lost weight, dark circles etched under my eyes. My gaze was hollow, haunted. The sight of myself like this felt alien, foreign. This wasn't the person I used to be, the one who'd been blindsided by Mia's lies, who'd been desperate to get her back even after everything she'd done. But I wasn't that man anymore either. Who are you then? The thought was harsh, taunting. I needed to find out. I needed to start somewhere, no matter how small. So I picked up the phone, only this time I didn't dial Mia's number. I called my parents. It had been almost a year since I'd spoken to them, too ashamed and angry at the world to answer their worried calls after Mia had vanished. They were hesitant at first, unsure of how to respond to my sudden reappearance. I stammered through an apology, forcing myself to explain, not everything, just enough for them to understand why I'd been so distant. "John, you don't have to explain," my mother said softly, her voice breaking. "We just want to know that you're okay, that you're healing." Healing, the word felt like a joke, but I nodded, forcing myself to believe it was possible. "I'm trying," I said. "I really am." She didn't press for details, didn't ask the questions I wasn't ready to answer. It was just what I needed, a gentle, non-judgmental acceptance. It felt like the first step out of the darkness I'd been sinking into for so long. The next step came a few days later when I drove down to the nearest counseling center. I sat in the car for almost an hour, hands gripping the steering wheel, nerves coiled tight in my chest. But I made myself walk in, sit through the awkward intake session, and schedule the first of what would become many therapy appointments. The therapist, a kind woman named Karen, didn't pry too deeply at first. We spoke about the basics, how I'd lost myself in a relationship that had been built on lies, how I'd let anger and resentment consume me. When I admitted what I'd done to Mia, she didn't react with shock or condemnation. She just asked, "Why do you think you needed to hurt her back?" The question hung heavy in the air. I stumbled through answers about justice, about needing to see her pay, but none of it felt complete, and she knew it. "What about you, John?" Karen pressed gently. "What did you need from that?" I didn't have an answer then, not a real one, but I knew I had to figure it out. And slowly, over weeks and months of sessions, I began piecing it together. The truth was, I hadn't just wanted to hurt Mia, I'd wanted to prove something to myself. That I wasn't weak. That I wasn't a fool for believing in her, for falling for her lies. I'd needed to regain control, to feel powerful again. Admitting that hurt, it hurt more than anything else I'd uncovered during this whole ordeal. But it was also freeing in a way. Because it meant that the problem wasn't just Mia or what she'd done, it was me. And I could change that. I started reaching out to friends I'd pushed away, reconnecting with people who'd once been close to me. A few of them accepted my apologies cautiously, others less so. But I understood their hesitation. I'd built a wall around myself so high, it was a wonder they'd even let me back in at all. Slowly, though, I rebuilt those bridges, found a support system that didn't revolve around anger or revenge. My job, the one I'd neglected for so long, welcomed me back with surprising grace. I'd half expected them to have written me off after my erratic behavior over the past year, but my boss simply gave me a firm handshake and a quiet word of advice. "Everyone has rough patches, John. Just don't lose yourself again. Don't lose yourself again." I thought about those words often as the months passed. I thought about them on days when I woke up still expecting a message from Mia or Greg, on days when the urge to check up on them, to see where they were, nearly consumed me. But each time I forced myself to stop, to remember why I'd let Mia go in the first place. One evening I sat alone in my living room, staring at an old photo of Mia and me. We looked happy, both of us laughing at some joke I couldn't even remember. The picture was worn around the edges, the colors faded, but it was the last piece of her I'd kept, the last tied to the life I thought I'd wanted. I'd thought about deleting it 100 times, but something always stopped me. Maybe it was the part of me that didn't want to let go of what had once felt real, but I knew holding on to it wasn't healthy. It was time to say goodbye. With a deep breath, I pressed the delete button and watched the image vanish from my screen. There was no rush of relief, no sudden sense of freedom, just a quiet, almost imperceptible shift, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally lifted. It was a small step, but it was one I needed to take. In the end, I couldn't erase what had happened. I couldn't undo the damage Mia had done to me, or what I'd almost done to her in return. But I could choose to move forward, to stop letting those memories define me. I wasn't the person who needed revenge anymore. I wasn't the man who would sacrifice everything for some hollow sense of justice. I was just John, scarred, broken in places, but not beyond repair. There were moments of hope, too, unexpected glimmers that hinted at a future I hadn't considered before. Simple things, like a cup of coffee shared with an old friend, or a walk through the city that no longer felt haunted by her presence. I'd catch myself smiling sometimes, almost forgetting the shadow that had loomed over me for so long. I began volunteering at a local shelter, helping people who were struggling to get back on their feet. It felt good to do something positive, something that wasn't about settling scores or looking back. There was a purity in it, a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life for too long. One day, as I was leaving the shelter, my phone buzzed with a notification. For a moment, my heart clenched. Old habits die hard, but it wasn't from Mia or Greg. It was an email from an old friend asking if I wanted to grab lunch sometime. It was an innocuous message, but it brought a genuine smile to my face. I looked at the city around me, feeling a strange sense of lightness. There was a future waiting for me here, one that wasn't tangled up in Mia's lies or Greg's anger. I could build something new, something that wasn't about revenge or regret. I turned off my phone and slipped it back into my pocket, breathing in the crisp autumn air. As I walked down the street, I felt a quiet resolve settling in my chest. I'd been through hell, but I was still here. And I was ready to start again, because in the end, that's what moving on really was. Not forgetting or erasing the past, but learning to live with it, to accept it as a part of me without letting it control me. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, but I'd face them one day at a time, and maybe, just maybe, I'd find peace on the other side.